Okay, it looks like we're gonna get started. Before we start, how many people in here are part of like red team or pen testers, and then part of defense? Okay, good. So hopefully this is to help both of us to learn, how to evade these services or maybe how to stop them. So our tool we're going to talk about is Empty Nest. First, this was written by Tom Steele and me. Tom wasn't able to make it this week, but we both work at Optiv, part of the attack and penetration team, and he has a new book coming out. He's part of a co-author of Black Hat Go. It's kind of like Black Hat Python, so you want to check it out. The No Starch Press people. Okay, so what started this this project was, AV. Everybody knows is super easy to bypass. You change one bit or you change a couple code execution flows, and you don't have to worry about AV at all. You also don't, if you use PowerShell, it never catches PowerShell until lately with the new logging features in Windows 10. But when we test new heuristics and NER solutions, we're discovering that they're injecting their own DLL into your process. So any system call you make, if you try to load any library, if you try to unload libraries, if you try to write shellcode into a process, it's able to see that and then kill your process immediately. So what started this was we were testing an endpoint solution, and it was blocking our payloads. It would execute fully, and then we would get a connection back, but it would die, and we couldn't figure out why. So after troubleshooting, we from all the way from Mimikatz, we write something that's super complex, all the way to a simple message box. It would get caught. So there's a stub inside of Metasploit and Cobalt Strike that uses this shellcode to set up a reflective DLL injection, and when that gets seen by the process, it kills it. So we had to find out a way to bypass it. We also found out that there's some endpoint solutions that actually will monitor traffic. So if your interpreter binary is able to execute, when it goes out, it'll actually see that traffic, even if it's HTTPS, and it'll say, hey, this is interpreter traffic, and it'll kill it off. And then we notice sandbox solutions are becoming more and more popular. Okay, so first, let's talk about first-party payload generations. That's with Metasploit, Cobalt Strike. The good thing about these is they're really easy to use, right? You can make any payload for multiple architectures in both of these. But the bad is they're easy to catch. So if you ever drop a Metasploit binary anywhere, it's obviously going to get caught, no matter how much you do anything to it. You can encrypt shellcode, and that might bypass some of it. But like I said, if an endpoint solution's reading your memory process, it's going to catch that DLL injection. Third-party payload generations are something like Veil and Ebola. Both these are really good projects, right? Veil's now moved over to trying to create unique binaries with key payloads. So a key payload is something that you look for before actually executing your malicious code. So you can base it off a username or domain that you're looking for. You can base it off of how much RAM is installed. So some VMs only have 2 gigabytes of RAM. If you look for more than 2 gigabytes, then you can safely assume that you're not a VM, so you can execute, or CPU cores. If you have more than 2 or 1 core, you might be able to execute. But some of the bad parts is, right, you got to know about your environment. Yeah, you got to know what you're targeting, or you might leave it up to chance that you are not in a sandbox, and then the VM's telling you there's the same cores or RAM. Also, the bad part is, from what I can tell with Veil and Ebola, obviously you can't change the network. You're just modifying shellcode. Okay, so let's get into Empty Nest. So Empty Nest is a pluggable C2 framework. Go is it's a cross-platform language that allows us to write plugins as of 1.8. It's only supported for Linux. This is for the server part only. So you'll have to run your server on a Linux machine. And what a plugin is and we'll go over this when we look through how the plugins work. But it just creates a .so file or a library file that the Go main program can read and use. So this is not a replacement for any of the major Empire, Metasploit, or Cobalt Strike. We want you to use this as a stepping stool, or like your first contact with the client. This will let you know what is running in your environment, or running in the environment that you're up against. Maybe you get access to a machine and there's no protection at all, so you can go ahead and launch your Metasploit or Cobalt and pivot and pillage to your heart's content. But maybe you get on a machine that is using one of these EDR solutions that you have to be more sneaky. And if so, then you have to know what DLLs to unload. I don't know if I mentioned that. Back when we were looking at those EDR solutions, some of them can be unloaded with just using stuff like free library. So that's also a good thing to look if you're doing testing or if you're using this and you use the list modules. You'll see a DLL loaded, and if you do free library on it, it'll just remove it without any complaints and leave your process running. Also, last year there was a talk at Derbycon for ABT29, and what was really cool about this is every 4 or 5 payloads, they would actually change their encryption schema. So one scheme might have AES, and then the next scheme uses RC4, and it was just hard for the incident response people to figure out like what this traffic looked like, how they were supposed to catch it if it kept changing. So we wanted to implement that into this, and we'll show that you can actually chain the amount of encryption algorithms you want. So again, this is a bring your own agent. When we talk about the code or the client generator, what we're doing is we're going to give you the code for a client, like a basic client, and then you can modify it to your heart's content. You can add like random math functions. You can add different code flows. You can add your own information gathering or your own anything you want. So we wanted everybody to have their own unique thing without just offering a standard plain binary that can easily get caught within the next day. Okay, so a handler plugin is what we use for all the transports. It's protocol independent, and these will handle all the incoming agent connections. Currently, we support HTTP and HTTPS. We're working on DNS and XMPP, but you could write it for anything, right? So anything that can accept an incoming connection, you can write a plugin for it, and you can easily start accepting those new connections. So we'll look at those real quick. Maybe. So the way we have our empty nest project layout is everything under plugins is going to be able to be plugged into your main project. So as you see here, we have crypto, encoders, info, payloads, and transports. So we're going to look at the transports plugin real quick. And all we need to do is this big handle function. So this handle function takes the method. So we support get and post. And then it will extract those down below. So then we do a case switch for, you can put it into a cookie, a header, a body. In the post request, we have a body. So every time you wanted to set up one of these new ones, and even your clients, so if you supported those cookies or you supported the query, you could then have one client send it over a simple query, and then another client send it over the cookie. So it's never the exact same traffic being sent back and forth. And that's pretty much it. They will go over and read all your crypto chains and encrypt it and decrypt it in the right order. And we'll go over the crypto chains in a little bit. All right, so our information plugins, this is what we want to gather and want to know about before we actually start executing any code. These can be as simple as grabbing your username or hostname that you're on. You can do a current module list, disk size, total memory. So anything you want to grab. There's some caveats to this. So if you just grab a username and hostname for the machine, malware usually does the exact same thing, so you might get caught on that. But if you try to think of how a binary installer works, maybe you check some registry keys, maybe you do check the disk size, just different ways to act as, try to be as benign as possible. Again, the info plugins are pretty simple. So this is all an info plugin is that we're going to be demoing today. It takes your arg length, so we're going to have two args as the username and the host name. How we're going to split it, so when we gather this information from the host, we're actually going to put it in a byte array, and then that is going to be split by XFF. And then we just return a string back to the transport module. So as you see, it's pretty simple to write, and you could add more information if you wanted to, you add less information. Okay, so now we have the payload plugins. Obviously, you want to support command execution. These are simple OS commands that you want to send down to the host. Proxy. We found this pretty useful. So Cobalt Strike uses I think it just got updated, but it used to only do a 4-byte URL. So if you ever see your Cobalt Strike stager hit your web server, it's a 4-byte URL that can be should be easily able to write a signature for. And then shellcode, so you can directly inject shellcode into your process once it's connected back to you. Future, we want to do, again, listing DLLs and unloading DLLs. It's pretty much written. We just want to make it work with all the clients that we have as of right now. And then if we look at our shell code, it's pretty much the same thing. So you can take either a file or shellcode as a parameter. And then this is how it processes it. It takes it, it decodes it, and sends it back over the wire. Not much into it. Once you have it written, you can use it with all the other. Doesn't matter what encryption you're using or what transport you're using. It's all separate from each other. So encoding, I'm going to go over encoding and encrypting in the same time. But right now we support base 64, base 32, and hexadecimal. And then for encryption, we do RC4, XOR, AES, and triple DES. Again, we chose these because most of them are streams. So RC4, AES are in XOR streams. And then we wanted to make it simple enough that future efforts, we thought it'd be a cool idea, is if you wrote a RC4 and you never transmitted the key or you never knew the key, and then every request was encrypted with a new key, and then you would brute force your key on the server side. It didn't have to be a long key; it can be 4 or 5, or like four bytes, and then every time you sent a new one, you would have to brute force a new key. So here's all our different encoders. Well, let's just look at base 64. So this is all it is to include an encoder inside of empty nest. You just do a base 64 encode and decode, and it takes a byte array and returns your bytes or an error. So pretty simple. And then all the encryptors take two functions, or it takes 3, but the name one doesn't really matter. But you want an open and a seal, and these encrypt and decrypt your traffic for you. So if you wanted to write a new one, maybe for AES, it's the same thing, right? Open in Steele, you change some parameters, and you're good to go to use AES now. Des, it's the same thing, a little more code. But so now we have 3 different encryption algorithms that we can use at any time for any of the traffic. Okay, so next is sandboxing. So this is what it looks like when a sandbox tries to execute your code. This is I uploaded a binary up to VirusTotal for fun, just to see what it is, and they actually run a lot of your binaries through one of these sandboxes. As you see, if you're targeting a company and their host name is Tequila Boom Boom, you're probably not going to execute code on that machine. Also, things to look at, we noticed, as you see, administrator on John's PC, they're probably not going to run as administrator. And Bob's PC, I've seen a few where they don't even include a username and they just have the host name. So the reason why we have it set up this way is it takes a little more human intuition to knowing if you're in a sandbox or if you're actually on a user's PC. The way we have the clients right now is they'll wait indefinitely for your return. So if you are in a sandbox for 15 minutes or however long they sit you in a sandbox, then it'll just wait and wait and wait and wait for your interaction with it. There's no sleeps, so they can't just do bypass that sleep, and then you have full access to that machine again. So this is how the lifecycle of your handler works. It looks a little hard to read, but so you magically get code execution, right? Just any way you want to do it. We have PowerShell clients. But then once you get the code execution, your host info will be encrypted, and that can be encrypted, again, any way you want it, and then encoded and then sent over HTTP. Then the operator, or whoever's at the server, can either accept or deny it, and then you do whatever you want with it. So when you accept or deny a incoming connection, you can also pass in a payload to it. So one of those shellcodes commands. All right, so next one is we have a client generator. So when we talked to a few people, first we were just going to release the server and let people come up with their own clients. So everybody has their own unique client that they can use without ever worrying about it getting caught. But people wanted some more examples, and we thought it would be a good idea to give at least a skeleton of what a client should look like or what a client does. So we worked on creating one for Go, C, and PowerShell. I think Go is a really good language to show demo-wise. It's easy to do, like I said, all the encryption algorithms pretty simple. The C, you can make it really small and put in a DLL, make it reflective DLL. And then PowerShell is just PowerShell. PowerShell works 95% of the time. As you'll see, I'm really disappointed with PowerShell. Last night we were doing a lot of coding on a lot of testing. And I wanted to test Avast just to make sure certain things were working. And my Go payload worked without a problem. And then PowerShell, it blocks, which was sad. Okay, so our Go client, right? We support all the major things that the server does, so base64, base32, hex, RC4, XOR, AES. I did not write DES, but it could pretty easily. Right now, we're only going to demo the username and domain information gathering. But Go has the ability to load DLLs from Windows, so you could easily do the whole disk utilization. You could do any of the other things by using just loading the DLLs. C, this was working. I wrote my own, or not my own, but I wrote the base64, base32, and hex encoders. And then when I went to go test it to bring it here, it didn't work anymore. So I use a third-party library for now until we get it to work. And then it supports RC4 and XOR. PowerShell, same thing. It does base64 and hex. Base32, I haven't figured out how to do yet easily in PowerShell. So what we'd like to do in future plans, for Harry at least, would be to import configuration files. And we're going to go through this whole setup of how to set up the server, then how to set up the clients. But the client generation right now is to do a menu. It's menu driven, so you pick it like set or any other menu driven tools out there. You get to pick what you want, but it would be cool if you just like threw a configuration file out in here and say, hey, like I want it to run on HTTP with these parameters, use these encryptions, and then like spit out my binary or spit out my code for me that I can then compile. More language support, so it'd be cool to have like VB. You know, macros are dying, but they're not dead yet. And then including more of the information, more encoding, more encryption, just as much as we can cram pack in there, so everybody can have their own custom, random code running out there on the internet. So this is in case other things don't work. But, okay. So let's go over Harry first. Okay, so it gives you 3 options for our languages. We're just going to choose Go. Like I said, it's just easier to use for right now. Then we have these lists of options, so we can either set our encoding, our encryption, transport, all the stuff. All right, so we're going to use base32. I've come to like base32 for if you use it in a URL query, right? So if you use like UUID or ID inside of a URL, base32 is better to use. For our encryption, let's just use RC4 for now, and we'll just give it 4 A's. We'll set our transport to HTTP, and then so do that, and the port, obviously all customizable. We're going to gather the username and the computer name, and then for code execution, we can do some shellcode injection. And then when we go to generate the code, it knows that we picked HTTP, so it's going to ask us if we want to do a get or a post to the server. So we'll say a get, and then we'll change it to UUID for the query parameter. So this is really cool. I thought it was good to add. How many people know about domain fronting? It's been pretty popular lately. So a brief background on domain fronting is if you send a request to a major provider like Amazon or Cloudflare, it will look at your host header, and if your host header doesn't match the, if your host header points to something different besides the host, it'll actually redirect it to your host. So if you have another server on Cloudflare, it will actually redirect to yours. So you can hide behind Amazon with this technique. If you do it over to HTTP and they use proxies, some proxies don't like it and they'll kill your connection. But you can do it over SSL. Again, if they use SSL encryption, it might catch it. So I always thought it was good to have. But if you leave it blank, it just uses the regular host. Then it writes it to a file. So I thought it was important not to compile code for people. I didn't want to just generate this code and then give you a binary and then you run it on places. I thought it was very important to allow people to edit, add, remove, whatever they want on their machine, or on their binary. So right here we have our base32 encoding and decoding functions. RC4, we're going to gather these users. Here's our host, our get, and our request header. Our shellcode execute is going to be in here, and then our key for RC4 is right here, and then the rest is pretty much self-explanatory. It's going to first encrypt that data, so it's going to grab that username and password. It's going to encrypt it, base32 encode it, and send it over the internet. When it gets it back from the server, it's going to decode the base32 and then unencrypt it and execute the shellcode. Again, so this is only good once, right? You get one shot at it. If it's a good client, you get shell execution done. If you wanted to support more, so if you wanted to do commands along with it, we actually send your first byte in the stream from the server is an ID byte. So shellcode execution is byte 1. If you want to do command execution, it's byte 2. So you actually could make a case switch statement that would read that first byte and then execute what you wanted afterwards. Again, that's why I wanted everybody to be able to edit their own things, add their own things. So we're going to compile this for Windows 64. No, we're not. Okay, so we're going to compile this for Windows 64. And we're going to go ahead, and while that's loaded, let's look at the empty nest. So this is in a Docker container right now. There is a make file. These are the commands you need to run to get all your plugins built, set up, and in their own directory. If you add more libraries, you can just add it to this make file, and you're done, and you're good to go. I can compile them all because it doesn't matter if they're compiled or not. In your configuration file, they'll actually run what you want. So if we go into the server, here's our config file. So we use a BoltDB. It's a very lightweight key value pair database. Kind of like SQLite, but. So this payload plugins directory is where all your plugins are going to, or all your payload plugins are going to be. So if you have your command payload or shellcode payload, it's going to be under this directory. And here's everything for our transport. We're going to change our ports whatever we want. If we want to look at the, there we go. So here's our, and so it's going to load this configuration file for your HTTP. So if we wanted to change this parameter to just ID, so now every time it connects back, it's going to look for that ID parameter, and anything in that ID parameter, it's going to decode that and decrypt it and everything. And then we're going to use base32 to encode, and then for demo purposes right now, we're going to use just plain RC4 and this encryption chain. So I'll show it later, but this encryption chain above, the one I'm highlighted on right now, does RC4 and then AES CRT, or CTR, sorry. And then your key chain is the key for each one of these encryption algorithms. It's in hex. It can be changed. But so the 4 A's we put in are the 41414141. And then, yeah, so right now we're just going to use RC4. We're going to use the 4 A's, and we're going to base32 encode it. That looks right. We're going to listen on port 8081. And there we go. It's pretty lightweight. You can do hosts. All these should have a help command. And they'll tell you a little bit like what they do. There's no tab completion as of right now. There's no up and down completion as of right now. Okay, so payloads. We want to add a payload. We can list them first, right? So if you had multiple payloads, libraries loaded, it would show them under here. So you could have shellcode, commands, proxies. But we just have the shellcode right now, so we can do payloads, add shellcode, and then you give it a name. Should we get a shell right off the bat, or anyway, we can do like a message box. So you give it a name, and then you pass in the shellcode. So the shellcode could be in a file, if you wanted, or you can paste it in. So we're going to do that real quick. So we're going to do a 64-bit interpreter reverse TCP, this IP, this port, and that should give us our shellcode that we're going to use. So we paste that right in, and it works, and then we can do payloads show 1. What is it? So we do payloads get one. Anyways, so it'll show that the name, the kind, and the data, right? So the name is the name you gave it that you're going to pass in later when the host connects back, the kind of the payload that you're going to run, and then the data. Cool. So we should be all ready to go. We're going to run it on Windows 7 first. So it should be on the desktop. You just paste it down here somewhere. Oh no. Oh. Right, base 32. No. So 8081, the client's going to connect back to empty nest first, and then it's going to connect to Metasploit on 8080. We'll just regenerate it, I guess. So set encoding, base 32. Oh, I don't think I moved it, that's why. All right, so that should work, maybe, hopefully. Okay, 8081. We get our new file. Place it. No. Oh. All right, well. I guess. Oh, well. That's really strange. Okay. Well, we'll do this for now. Okay, so here's the video. So disappointing. Can you see it very well? I don't know where my mouse is. Where's my mouse? Okay, so this is gonna be really hard to see, right? So we start we start the server like we did before. We cat the shellcode for Cobalt Strike. We do our payloads add. I named it shellcode, and then you pass in the shellcode. Same thing we did before. We do a payloads get. We run it on a machine, and we get our connection back. I left the debugging information in, so it should show you that we did code the base 32, we decrypt it in the right correct order, and we get the plain text back. And then we can go ahead and approve or deny it. So this first one, I believe I didn't. Oh, okay, I accepted it. So we get a connection back automatically, or not automatically, but we get a connection back from the client, and we're able to execute Cobalt Strike commands. It's really disappointing that it didn't work. I just wanted to show the Avast part, hopefully. Actually, oh, it's almost time. Okay, well, if it's almost time, if anybody wants to meet up with me later, I can show you Avast. So the cool thing about Avast that we saw is it will actually, if it's a brand new binary dropped on the machine, it really won't do anything, right, because it's not a virus, it didn't catch anything. But when you run it, it'll actually say, hey, like, this binary might be malicious. Like, let us hold on for it for a little bit. So it'll actually execute another version of it inside of a sandbox. But you can't tell that it's any different. It runs as the same user. It still runs in everything else. It just scans it for, I think, 15, 20 seconds. And then once it's done executing, it'll drop it back down to the user's permission. And like gives a nice little message saying, hey, like, thanks for letting us take it. But yeah, so that's actually pretty cool. You wouldn't be able to see that on any other thing. So if you ran a key payload and you saw that it looks like a regular machine, it would see all that stuff being injected into the process and catch it and kill it. Which actually, and this might. So the PowerShell, that was the interesting thing about the PowerShell, is that it would run and then say, I'd get all the information back. And it would tell me, and then I would send the shellcode, and then it says, hey, PowerShell is pretty evil, and kills it, and it doesn't give you anything else saying, but it says like, hey, we put PowerShell in a treasure chest, I think they call it. I don't know, but they actually blocked PowerShell, which was really interesting. Oh, see, there you go. See. So yeah, PowerShell.exe is a virus. I use PowerShell on engagements all the time, but it's really interesting to see a home product, a pro home product, catch and block PowerShell. The GitHub links are up here. Empty Nest has been pushed up, and then Harry was pushed up this morning. Submit pull requests. If you have any issues, send them our way. We'll work on it. Are there any questions? If you don't strip so you can strip the symbols. If you don't strip them, I think they're like 2 to 5 megs. The 32 bits are probably about 2 megs, and the 64s are 5. If you strip them, they get close to about a meg in size. What was that?
You talked about context key coding, I think it's on like your second or third slide. Is that kind of like that uninformed article that came out a couple years ago where like you just do like a secret ID real quick or something, grab the information, use that as a context key?
Oh, you could. Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah, that'd be another good thing. I haven't read that, but something like that, changing the keys. We thought it would be a cool idea, like I said, to like brute force your own key for every request. Yeah.
You talk about your primary payload itself, you have multiple things for execution and multiple proxy, right?
Yeah.
Is that all the communication that you send over the same function initially called in on?
So you could. I think right now it only sends out the first request, depending on what your client wants. But yeah, you could actually tunnel all the traffic between you and so we thought the proxy thing was cool. Because Cobalt Strike used to only do the 4-byte thing. And then if you burnt your empty nest, you could then still have your Cobalt Strike or your Metasploit like never burn. All right. Well, thanks, guys.